Okay. Hello, fellow game developers. Welcome to my talk for this year's Games Industry Conference. First of all, I'd like to thank the conference organizers for giving me the possibility to give you this talk. I remember that when I first came here, this conference had even a different name. And it was a long time ago. I was but a high school student, and I thought, it would be cool to one day give a talk on this conference. And here I am. So my talk is titled Accessible Games, You Can Create Them Too. And as you can guess, I will be speaking about accessibility in games, meaning how to create games in such a way that you are not excluding people from enjoying them. But first, a little about me. My name is Mateusz Pusty. I currently hold a position as a lead Unity developer at Pancake Games. I have 6+ years of experience in Unity, so I'm mostly a programmer. You can reach me if you want on these addresses on Twitter or LinkedIn or via my website. And my work comprises, but it's not limited, of 60 parsecs when I was working for Robot Gentleman, as well as 60 seconds reatomize. I also worked on Nuker. It was this wall where you throw balls, and I wrote games for that. And FunBrush, which was an interactive app designed for kids to help them brush their teeth in a more fun way. You might also remember me for conducting the karaoke night on Friday evening after party. And if you were taking part in the karaoke, then I hope you had good fun. And if you haven't, then I'm really sorry for that. But talking about my experience related to the topic of this talk, I am one of the main organizers of All Play Game Jam. This is a game jam organized here in Poznań, which is organized by Poznańska Gamers Guild. And this is a group of people that unites around gaming and organizes a very nice, very fun events that are local, although currently we've been on hold because of this pesky global health crisis that we have going on. And one of such events is this Accessibility Game Jam that has a goal of raising awareness about accessibility issues in games among game developers. The Game Jam is a two-part event. The first part is lectures. We have speakers that give talks about making games accessible. And in the second part, the participants are trying to create the games using this new knowledge. So what this talk will be about? First, it will be divided into 3 sections. First, what is accessibility and why it is important? Second, how to improve upon some of the design features of your games so they are more accessible. And third, I will give you some links to find more resources about this topic if you're interested to pursue it further. And first and foremost, the main goal of this presentation is to raise awareness. And although it's getting better and the games are more and more accessible these days, than it was even a few years ago, it's still not great and can be improved upon. And the other goal is to give some basic information to you so you can improve your games and give you enough knowledge to get you started in the topics of accessibility. So let's dive deep and start with something fun, the numbers. The games industry is currently the biggest entertainment market in the world, and it is estimated that there are 3.24 billion people that are playing games. These are casual games, hardcore games, mobile, console, PC, every types of players there are. The data is here from the Statista, you can check it out. And we're currently getting close to having 8 billion people on the planet, and 1 billion of those people is people with some sort of disability. Of those 1 billion people, there is 46 million gamers that are living in United States alone that have some sort of disability. So that basically means that if you target a market like Poland, because that's more people that live currently in Poland. So if you market Poland or similar size of region for your games and you do translation work, you release it there, then you're potentially, if you're not thinking about accessibility, you're potentially ignoring 46 million people in the United States that can be prevented from playing your game. There are 226 million gamers totally in the US, so doing some math so my primary teachers can be proud of, this is about 20% of people in the United States that have some sort of disability that play games. And if we extrapolate that, it's 648 million gamers on the whole world using the numbers before, using some Fermi-style estimation. And that's a lot, so it's something to think about. But before we go any further, I would like to give you a definition of disability. A person with a disability is a person who has physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. And this is a definition from the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. It's a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. In addition to that, it also requires to provide accommodations for your employees if you employ people with disabilities, some public accommodations, stuff like that. It's also been held to work with businesses and services provided over the internet. And although it hasn't been held to apply to video games directly, there are a few legal documents that actually do. And the first one in the United States is the Communications and Video Accessibility Act that requires you to implement things like in-game chat using UI and options to navigate that must be accessible to other people. And for the Europe, there is European Accessibility Act that basically does the same thing as CVAA, but is a little bit more specific about requirements that you need to do. But a little disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, so in order to know how you might apply this to your games or your projects, please consult it with one. And despite that there are some regulations that regulate how services such as websites or Netflix should work in order to be accessible, games are not really something that can be adjusted for people with disabilities. At least it's not something that most of people think they can, but they do. But why is that? And the reason number one is lack of awareness, I think. It's mostly not intended, despite of years of raising awareness by accessibility educators. That's still a topic that not a lot of people think about when making games. And smaller indie teams often don't have anybody on them who actually has any sort of disability. So there's no one to raise those issues when they are designing those games. And this is also not something that is taught during the video game courses on game design, or if you Google how to make a game in Unity, you will not hear about the need of making your games also accessible. Personally, I haven't heard about this topic before like a few years. And when I was thinking about creating games, I just basically thought, okay, how to make my game fun? I should be thinking how to make my game fun for everybody. The second reason is time and money. So if a company is aware that there are some accessibility issues in their games, they often put fixing those flaws on a very low priority with an excuse that we still need to finish the game, we don't have time to do accessibility features, or there is no time to add accessibility if we have feature X and Y still to implement. So it's often pushed back to be nice to have instead of a need to have. And again, this is also very, very true for smaller teams that do not have a lot of resources. they might not be able to pay a full-time salary to somebody to just implement those accessibility features. So this is something that only often bigger companies can offer. And adding accessibility features is also not perceived as something that will bring back money that will be spent on developing those features. So in terms of the first reason, I think that, at least for you, the lack of awareness is already remedied because you're here on this talk and you're hearing me speak about it. So let's talk about why I think those reasons why people might put accessibility on site are not true. In reality, adding accessibility features to your games may increase sales because differently able gamers are people that specifically look for games that they can play. And as we saw from the numbers before, that is a huge market. So there is a huge market of people that are just going through the games, checking if they can play them, and if they do, they buy them at full price. There is also a lot of people that actually know somebody who has a disability, and they also will play those games if their friends with disabilities play them, so they can play together. So this can lead to increase of sales, so we can get even more money than we did before. A lot of these kind of games that implement accessibility features get free advertising because of the media that spin this in a positive way. They make articles that the games have been accessible, what features are there, stuff like that. And if you don't do decent enough job on making your games accessible, currently even you can have negative PR. For example, Spyro, when it was remastered to Reignited Trilogy, they were having a very tough time on the web because of not having subtitles when they released the game. And everybody was mad about it. From more recent releases, Deathloop, that's critically acclaimed and everybody loves the game and idea and concept, actually has an hour-long reading on Games Industry B's article that says that it lacks basic accessibility. So it's good to do at least the bare minimum if you can, if you can't do anything else. But that's one of the reasons why you should do accessible games. And about the issue of time, a lot of times, if you think about the accessibility features that your game may need, you don't need to spend a lot of time developing them because you can think of when designing your features about this from the beginning. So this means that when you're designing a feature like some UI, if you design it in a non-accessible way, then if you want to change it later when the game is released, that will be a huge pain in your back to do that. If you do that from the beginning and draw your UIs in a way that they can be accessible, then you don't really have any more work than you would normally have. And additionally, these features can also benefit some people that are not really people with disabilities. For example, I was benefiting from an accessibility feature in Spider-Man Miles Morales that allowed me to disable the haptic feedback on the triggers when swinging on a web because I just didn't like it. And there are also social reasons to implement those features. So games provide vast worlds that can allow people to forget about their real life problems and provide a way to relieve stress or cope with personal issues. But by not adding accessibility features, you can essentially block some of those that may need the escape the most. So in my opinion, these benefits really outweigh the hesitation that you may have that I pointed out before. And let's now just talk about some ways in which you can make your games more accessible. On a small note, a lot of the examples and things that I will be showing you next is also available on gameaccessibilityguidelines.org website, which is, the links will be provided at the end, so you don't need to type it in. But this is a website that basically is a checklist that shows you what you can do to improve your games. So there are 5 categories of disabilities in which you can improve your games. The first one is motor mobility. This category addresses issues that people might have due to having some motor impairments. These might be things as not having a limb, as having a part of your body paralyzed, not having control over muscles, and this can be persistent or just temporary if you broke an arm and you cannot use it to play games. So the most important thing in this category is to allow people to do controls remapping. This is something that PC games often do, but you may notice that not every console game is actually doing that. And if you want to make your control remapping to be actually useful to people with some disabilities, having a dedicated control remapping screen allows the player to get proper in-game feedback about what they can do with this button when they approach some interactive element. And if you rely on console-wide remapping on consoles, which is available as like a safety net for people with disabilities, then if you change your button X to be a button B, then every button X will behave as a button B. And if you use a custom control remapping screen, then your players can assign the buttons the actions that you have for the same button to 2 different buttons, for example. Also, while designing control mapping screen, make sure that all of your actions can be mapped to any button. Don't limit your mappings for looking around to analog axes, and allow them to be mapped to separate buttons. Allow adjusting the sensitivity of those axes and probably even how much a simple button press will move your character forward. If you can, then allow having multiple inputs working simultaneously. Instead of limiting the player to use only keyboard or only gamepad, allow them to also use both of these devices. A lot of players might be using multiple very specific input devices connected to their PCs and allowing them to control a game in a way like they have, for example, 2 big buttons they operate with their feet because they cannot do it other way. So be mindful of that. A very good example of remapping is The Last of Us 2 that allows you also not only to remap the actions in the game, but they also allow you to change the controller orientation. So if you, for some reason, cannot hold the controller in a normal way, let's say you only have one hand and you want to play some Overcooked, then you can just remap, reorient your controller, and all the axes are pointing upwards. You don't need to change anything. They also allow you to save schemes for controls, so you can swap between them quickly and swap the left and right stick on the gamepad. And of course, adjust everything manually as well. Overwatch has also a very nice thing going with controls because you can actually assign separate controls to each of the characters in game. So if one character is controlled one way, you can control them, other characters other way. And additionally to controls remapping, you might want to allow people to change the behavior of some of your controls. If your game requires multiple button taps, maybe change it to simple one tap, maybe change it to hold, maybe from hold to toggle on, toggle off. And you might also want to allow, as I said, to disable haptic feedbacks or change the intensity of it. This is an example from the Spider-Man Miles Morales. You can disable adaptive triggers, you can change the vibration settings and vibration intensity on the gamepad. The second category is hearing. This category focuses on issues with hearing sounds. First of all, you need to ensure that none of your information is conveyed only using sound. So if you have like gameplay mechanic where the player needs to turn around because something exploded behind them, don't only do it with sound, also do it some way with visual aid. The next thing is that you should also allow the players to change the volume levels separately, because some of people that might want to hear better the dialogues, so they can, for example, mute some effects or music. You should also provide subtitles for them, and the best is if those subtitles are customizable. A lot of games offer subtitles, but they often do them not perfectly. So when you're designing subtitles for your game, always allow them to be differentiated from the background. So add some black background behind them, or allow them to be changed in a way that allows for more high contrast. Here you can also, for example, change the color for speakers, so if we don't see who's speaking on the screen, we can know it from the text on the subtitles. And everything here is customizable. You can also change the size of them from small, medium, large, so that's also a very good and fun thing. And the next category is vision. And just like in subtitles, make sure your UI is clear and readable, and don't differentiate things by color only. If you have people that have color blindness, then, for example, item rarity system that you can use in World of Warcraft to differentiate by colors, for people that don't perceive blue and green well, they can look the same. So always add some symbols or shapes, or even just a label that differentiate between, let's say, apprentice sword and expert sword. They may look the same, but they have the label that will tell the player what it is actually. And just like in subtitles, make sure your UI is clear and readable. Design it in a way that provides a way to be differentiated from the backgrounds. You can also go an extra mile and prepare some versions that are very high contrast. So you can, for example, have very bright yellow text for important things that you show them. That is also something that is very helpful for people with poor vision. For example, Overcooked allows you to change the text size, and they also allow you to set up dyslexia-friendly font. So if you can provide also some specialty fonts to be enabled in your games. If you have resources, you can, and your game might work with that, you can also enable screen reader support. On most of the major platforms, this is actually already available. You just need to implement it to your text. There's narrative on Xbox that can be enabled, and it will just read the text with a voiceover that can be adjusted to speed by persons on the console. And actually, if you really think that your game can be playable without visuals at all, then you can design them just like, for example, the fighting games are designed, that each action gives feedback with unique sound effect, and the audio is specialized, so you can know from which side of the screen, for example, the game is, the sound is coming from, which allows for people that completely don't have any vision to beat everybody else at Mortal Kombat or Killer Instinct. And the next one is cognitive. This category focuses on thought, memory, and processing of information. And the most important thing here is basically to allow the players to process the information as they need to. So provide tutorials that are easily accessible even during the game. Teach them in an interactive way, so don't just dump a bunch of text that is a wall of text basically and expect them to remember everything. So teach them your mechanics interactively and provide a way to look up those things if they need to. Also allow to disable some effects like camera shake, motion blur, camera distance. These things can cause nausea in some people. They can also even cause physical pain if you they don't have a way to disable them. Also allow players to process through the text prompts in their own time. So when you have dialogues, just X to continue before the dialogue is finished. You can also set it in the settings menu, so it can be enabled, disabled. If you have time, you can add some special features like the one from The Last of Us that helps players that are blocked in the game, so they can use a button combination and see everything that is interactable near them. So all these dots here are things that we can interact on different levels of the game, so we know, for example, that something is beneath us. And they are also actually accompanied with different sounds. So if something is over us, it's higher pitch. If something is lower us, it's lower pitch. So even people without sight can differentiate where the points on the map are. The last category is speech, and this is a very simple one. If you use speech recognition in your game, basically do not make it the only way to control your game. And if you offer a chat in your game, like voice chat, offer also a text-based alternative. This doesn't need to be typing. It can be some prompts that you just show up to other players from the selective choice. And for the end, some general tips. Try to offer difficulty settings. Every few years, we have a very great debate about the games from software. Should they include easy mode or not? If you want your games to be accessible, then try to offer some way to allow people to play with different difficulty. Because, let's be honest, something that's easy for me, for a person that doesn't have a limb, is not that easy to do. So our easy can be like their nightmare. Alex, actually, from Piranha Bytes, has a great thing going on with difficulty, because although the game is not balanced at all, in my opinion, they just provided you a way to balance the game by yourself, so you can just change everything as you wish. And I just made the game more fun for me because I just balanced it better. And always provide information about accessibility of your game. So before the players can buy your game, they should be able to read what is in your game available to them. So you can do this via website, you can do this via information on the box, Steam description. Just put this information somewhere that is easily accessible to them. Listen and respond to the feedback of your players. This is very important, because even if you do something wrong when making your games more accessible, but you will answer to the players that are telling you that something is wrong, nobody will be mad because you are responsive. It's best to set up a way of direct contact in accessibility issues. So, for example, you can have a website that is dedicated for that and has all the contact information, or just set up an email like accessibility@yourgamecompany.com to give players the way to have this contact. That brings us to the end. These are some links for sites that I really like you to visit. There's gameaccessibilityguidelines.com, .org, that I already told you. Able Gamers is a charity foundation that focuses on connecting developers and gamers and showing what games are accessible. Microsoft has guidelines about making accessible games on Xbox. They also have something called Xbox Adaptive Controller. It's the controller that works as a Xbox gamepad, but people can basically connect other input devices that they use using standard jack plug to them. International Game Developers Associations, I'm sure you've heard about them. They have the special division that does accessibility, and they have a conference called GAConf that is held each year. This year it was online, and it was actually a couple of weeks ago. And they have a lot of talks from major companies that tell what they do in order to make their games accessible. Sightless Combat is an amazing YouTube channel. It's the gamer that doesn't have any vision and plays almost every game. And audiogames.net is a repository of games that are basically games that use only audio. And I also noticed, so I added it, yesterday was an event, accessibility event, gamingalaito.com, that basically also had talks about accessibility. So that's all for me. I don't know if you have any questions. If you have, I will gladly answer them. You can get the slides using the link here and contact me on the mail or via Twitter or any way you want. Thank you. Oh, and I forgot, if you are a Polish speaker and want to have a folder with neat game accessibility guidelines, like condensed into one document, then I can give you that. I have 10 copies.